The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty wooden platform, and Eleanor Dawson clutched the small velvet pouch in her pocket so tightly that her knuckles turned white beneath her travel-worn gloves. Inside that pouch were the only things she had left from her mother's garden in Philadelphia: lavender seeds that smelled faintly of home and happier times before the war had taken her father, and the influenza had claimed her mother just 6 months past. It was March of 1876, and Agua Caliente, New Mexico Territory, looked nothing like the bustling city streets she had left behind. The driver opened the door with a creak that made Eleanor's heart jump. She stepped down carefully, her traveling dress coated in a fine layer of dust, despite her best efforts to stay clean during the 2-week journey. The sun blazed overhead with an intensity she had never experienced back east, and she immediately understood why this place bore the name it did: Agua Caliente. Hot water. Hot everything it seemed. Around her, the small settlement sprawled in haphazard fashion. Adobe buildings mixed with wooden structures, their paint peeling from the relentless sun. A few people moved along the street, their curious glances landing on her before moving away. She heard Spanish being spoken as readily as English, and somewhere in the distance, a hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. Eleanor scanned the faces nearby, searching for the man whose letters had been so earnest, so full of hope for a future together. Zachariah Lawson had written to her through the matrimonial agency with descriptions of his ranch, his dreams of building something lasting in this wild territory, and his need for a partner to share it all with. His words had been simple but honest, and after losing everything in Philadelphia, Eleanor had decided that a fresh start in the West was exactly what she needed. A tall figure separated from the shade of the general store's awning. He moved with a rancher's gait, purposeful and unhurried, and when he stepped into the sunlight, Eleanor's breath caught. Zachariah Lawson was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking pale blue that seemed even more vivid against his tanned face, and he held his hat in his hands as he approached, revealing the nervous gesture for what it was. "Miss Dawson." His voice was deeper than she had imagined, rough around the edges but not unkind. "Mr. Lawson." Eleanor managed a small smile despite her exhaustion and uncertainty. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting in the sun, and a small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was handsome in a rugged way that no Philadelphia gentleman could match. "The trip was long, I imagine." He twisted his hat in his hands, and Eleanor realized with some relief that he was just as nervous as she was. "I have a wagon ready whenever you are. The ranch is about an hour from town." "I am quite ready, Mr. Lawson. I should very much like to see what will be my new home." She tried to inject confidence into her voice, though uncertainty still plagued her. This man was a stranger, and she had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry him based on letters alone. Zachariah's expression softened, and he gestured toward where a sturdy wagon stood hitched to 2 patient horses. "Please call me Zachariah, or Zach if you prefer. We should probably get comfortable with names since we are to be married." He said it so matter-of-factly that Eleanor almost laughed. Instead, she nodded. "Then you must call me Eleanor." He helped her into the wagon with a gentle hand at her elbow, his touch careful and respectful. Her trunk was already loaded in the back, and once she was settled on the bench seat, Zachariah climbed up beside her and took the reins. The horses started forward with a gentle command, and soon they were leaving the small collection of buildings behind, heading into the vast expanse of the New Mexico Territory. The landscape, was unlike anything Eleanor had ever seen. Rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and hardy grasses stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by rocky outcroppings and distant mountains that rose purple against the horizon. The sky seemed impossibly large, an endless blue dome that made her feel both insignificant and strangely free at the same time. "It is very different from the east," Zachariah said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I know it must seem harsh at first, but there is beauty here if you know how to look for it." Eleanor considered his words carefully. "I can see that. It is just so open. In Philadelphia, there were buildings and people everywhere. Here, it feels as though we are the only two people in the world." "Sometimes it does feel that way," he agreed, "especially during the winter months when travel gets difficult. But there is a community here, small as it is. Good people trying to make honest livings. The territorial government is still young, but we are working to build something lasting." They talked as the wagon rolled across the land, and Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly. Zachariah spoke of his ranch, how he had claimed the land 5 years ago when he was just 21, fresh from fighting in the last years of the Indian Wars. He had wanted to build something peaceful after seeing so much violence, and ranching had seemed like the right path. "I have about 200 head of cattle now," he explained, pride evident in his voice. "And some horses I am training. The land is good for grazing, and there is a creek that runs through the property year-round. I built the house myself over 2 summers. It is not fancy, but it is solid." "I am not looking for fancy, Zachariah. I am looking for a home." Eleanor surprised herself with the honesty in her voice. "I've had enough of city life and its demands. My mother used to say that happiness grows from the ground up, that you cannot build it on anything but solid earth." Zachariah glanced at her, and something in his expression warmed. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I lost her to influenza last fall." Eleanor touched the pouch in her pocket again, drawing comfort from its presence. "She loved to garden. She had the most beautiful flowers you have ever seen, despite living in the middle of the city. Roses and lilies and lavender especially. She said lavender was useful for everything from cooking to medicine to keeping away moths." "Did you inherit her green thumb?" Zachariah asked. "I hope so. I brought seeds with me, lavender seeds from her garden. I thought perhaps I might plant them at the ranch, if that would be acceptable." The wagon crested a rise, and Zachariah pulled the horses to a stop. "There it is. That is home." Eleanor followed his gaze and felt her heart lift. In the valley below, a sturdy adobe house sat nestled against a hillside, its walls the same warm tan as the earth around it. A barn and several smaller outbuildings stood nearby, and she could see the glint of water from the creek he had mentioned. Trees grew along the water's edge, their green a vivid contrast to the brown landscape. Cattle dotted the hillsides, grazing peacefully, and the whole scene had a sense of permanence that Philadelphia had somehow lacked despite its grand buildings and paved streets. "Zachariah, it is beautiful." She meant it sincerely. He smiled, truly smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "I am glad you think so. I know it is not much compared to what you must be used to." "It is perfect," Eleanor said firmly. "Shall we go down?" The house was indeed simple but well made. The walls were thick adobe that Zachariah explained would keep them cool in summer and warm in winter. The main room held a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, and a rocking chair that sat near the window. A doorway led to a bedroom, and another to a small room that Zachariah said he used for storage. "I know it needs a woman's touch," he said, looking around the space with critical eyes. "I am not much for decorating or making things homey. I focused on making sure everything was functional." Eleanor set down her traveling bag and walked slowly around the room, taking everything in. The floor was packed earth, smooth and clean. Shelves held dishes and supplies, organized in a practical manner. The furniture was handmade but solid. Through the window, she could see the barn and the creek beyond. Everything spoke of a man who valued hard work and honest living. "Where would you like me to plant my lavender seeds?" she asked, turning to face him. Zachariah looked surprised by the question. "You want to plant them now?" "I have been carrying them for 2 weeks, and they represent the last connection I have to my mother. Yes, I should very much like to plant them now if you will show me a good spot." He studied her for a long moment, and Eleanor lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze with determination. She had not come all this way to be timid or passive. She had come to build a new life, and that started with putting down roots, literal ones. "There is a spot on the south side of the house that gets good sun but also some shade in the afternoon," Zachariah said slowly. "The soil there is decent, and it is protected from the worst of the wind. Would that work?" "That sounds ideal." Zachariah found her a shovel and a bucket for water, and Eleanor changed out of her traveling dress into a simpler work dress she had packed. When she emerged from the bedroom, Zachariah was waiting by the door, and his eyes widened slightly at her transformation. "I should tell you, Eleanor, that life on a ranch is not easy. There is always work to be done, and the days are long. I cannot afford to hire much help, so I do most of the work myself. I will not expect you to do men's work, but there will be plenty for you to manage with the house and garden and such." "I did not come here expecting leisure, Zachariah. I came here to build a life with you, and that means working alongside you." She picked up the shovel, testing its weight. "Now, show me this spot so we can plant these seeds before the day gets any older." They walked around to the south side of the house together, and Zechariah pointed out the area he had mentioned. The soil did look promising, darker than the surrounding earth, and Eleanor could see that water would naturally drain this way from the slight slope of the land. She knelt and began to dig, working the shovel into the earth with determined strokes. Zachariah watched for a moment, then went to fetch another shovel from the barn. He returned and knelt beside her, breaking up the soil with practiced efficiency. They worked in companionable silence, preparing the ground. The sun beat down on them, but Eleanor barely noticed. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical labor, about working the earth with her own hands. After weeks of sitting in stage coaches and trains, the movement felt good despite the ache already forming in her shoulders. When the soil was ready, Eleanor carefully withdrew the velvet pouch from her pocket. She loosened the drawstring and poured a small pile of seeds into her palm. They were tiny, dark specks that seemed insignificant, but she knew the potential they held. "Lavender takes time to grow," she said softly, scattering the seeds across the prepared ground. "It will not bloom the first year. It needs time to establish roots, to get strong enough to survive the winters. But once it is established, it can last for decades." Zachariah helped her cover the seeds with a thin layer of soil, his large hands surprisingly gentle. "That sounds like something worth waiting for." Eleanor fetched the bucket of water and carefully moistened the soil. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and looked at the patch of earth. It did not look like much now, just disturbed dirt, but she could already imagine the purple blooms that would eventually fill this space, the sweet scent that would drift through the window on summer evenings. "My mother always said that a garden is an act of faith," Eleanor said, not looking at Zachariah. "You plant something small and trust that it will grow, that the earth and sun and rain will do their work. You cannot force it or rush it. You just have to tend it and believe." Zachariah was quiet for a moment, then he said, "We'll grow together here." Eleanor turned to look at him, and the sincerity in his blue eyes took her breath away. He was not just talking about the lavender, she realized. He was talking about them, about the marriage they were about to enter, about the life they would build together in this wild territory. "Yes," she said softly, "we will." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that Eleanor had never seen in Philadelphia. Zachariah stood and offered her his hand to help her up. His grip was strong and calloused from years of ranch work, and Eleanor felt a strange sense of rightness as his hand closed around hers. "We should talk about the wedding," Zachariah said as they walked back toward the front of the house. "I spoke with Father Miguel in town. He can marry us whenever you are ready. I know you just arrived and you might want some time to settle in before we make things official." Eleanor considered this. The proper thing would be to wait, to observe all the niceties and formalities she had been raised with. But out here in the territory, those rules seemed less important. What mattered was commitment and partnership and building something lasting. "What would you prefer?" she asked. Zachariah stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun cast long shadows across his features, but his eyes were clear and direct. "I will not lie to you, Eleanor. I have been alone out here for 5 years. I have built this ranch with my own hands, and I am proud of what I have accomplished. But a ranch is not a life. I want a partner, someone to share the work and the rewards with. I want children someday, a family. I want to build something that will last beyond my own years. That is why I wrote to the matrimonial agency." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know you do not know me yet, and I do not truly know you, but I am willing to learn. I am willing to work at this marriage the same way I have worked at this ranch. I will be honest with you, and I will treat you with respect. That is my promise." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "That is all I ask for, Zachariah. Honesty and respect and partnership. I did not come here expecting romance or grand gestures. I came here expecting exactly what you just described, a chance to build something real. Then shall we marry soon? There is no sense in waiting if we are both committed to this path." "Yes," Eleanor said firmly. "Let us marry soon, but I have one condition." Zachariah raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" "I want to know more about you first. I want to spend time talking with you, learning about who you are and what you value. We do not need months of courtship, but we do need more than letters and one afternoon together." A slow smile spread across Zachariah's face. "That seems more than fair. How about this? We will spend the next week getting to know each other. I will teach you about the ranch and you can tell me about your life in Philadelphia. At the end of the week, if you still want to proceed, we will go into town and speak with Father Miguel." "Agreed." Eleanor held out her hand and Zachariah shook it solemnly, sealing their arrangement. That evening, Zachariah prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread while Eleanor unpacked her trunk in the bedroom. He had insisted she take the bedroom while he would sleep on a bedroll in the main room until they were properly married. It was another mark in his favor, his respect for propriety even out here where few would know or care about such things. They ate dinner at the sturdy table, and Zachariah asked Eleanor about her journey west. She told him about the train ride, the switch to stagecoach in Kansas, and the various characters she had encountered along the way. He listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. In turn, Eleanor asked about the ranch and the daily rhythms of life here. Zachariah explained the cycle of seasons, how spring was calving time when the new cattle were born, how summer meant long days of mending fences and moving herds to fresh grazing, how fall brought the hard work of preparing for winter, and how winter itself could be brutal or mild depending on the year's whims. "This last winter was relatively easy," he said. We only had 2 bad storms, and I only lost 3 head of cattle. Some years are much worse. 2 winters ago, I lost nearly a quarter of my herd to a blizzard that lasted 5 days. That must have been devastating, Eleanor said. It was hard, Zachariah admitted. But you learn that the land gives and takes. You cannot control it, only adapt to it. That is one of the first lessons I learned out here. As the evening deepened, they continued to talk. Eleanor found herself relaxing more and more in Zachariah's presence. He was thoughtful and measured in his speech, not given to empty flattery or exaggeration. When he spoke about his dreams for the ranch, his passion was evident but grounded in reality. He knew the challenges he faced and was honest about them. "Why ranching?" Eleanor asked at one point. "You said you fought in the Indian Wars. You could have done anything after that. Why come out here to raise cattle?" Zachariah was quiet for a long moment, his expression growing distant. "I saw a lot of death during those years, a lot of violence and suffering on both sides. When it was over, I knew I could not go back east and pretend to be civilized, to work in an office or a factory. I needed space and quiet and something life-giving to focus on. Ranching gave me that." Eleanor heard the pain beneath his words and understood it in a way she might not have before losing her own parents. Starting over can be healing. "Yes," he agreed, meeting her eyes. "It can be." That night, Eleanor lay in the bedroom that now felt like hers and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind whistling around the adobe walls, the creak of the wooden barn. It was so different from the city sounds she had fallen asleep to her entire life. The clatter of carriages, the voices of neighbors, the constant hum of human activity. Here, the silence was profound and a little frightening. But beneath the fear, Eleanor felt something else, possibility. She touched the velvet pouch of remaining lavender seeds she had kept back, planning to plant them elsewhere around the property, and thought about Zachariah's words. "We'll grow together here." The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Zachariah already up and working. Through the window, she could see him feeding the horses in the corral. She dressed quickly and made her way to the main room, where she found that he had left the fire going in the stove and a pot of coffee warming. She poured herself a cup and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and cool, a sharp contrast to the heat that would build as the day progressed. The sky was clear and impossibly blue, and the light had a quality to it that made everything seem sharper and more vivid than back east. Zachariah noticed her and waved, finishing up with the horses before walking over. "Good morning. I hope I did not wake you. I am used to starting early." "I am an early riser myself," Eleanor said. "What needs to be done today?" Zachariah looked surprised. "I have cattle to check on in the north pasture and some fence repairs to make. It is not exciting work." "May I come with you? I would like to see more of the ranch." He considered this, then nodded. "If you want to. It will mean several hours on horseback. Do you ride?" "I learned as a girl, though it has been some time." Eleanor refused to be daunted. "I can manage." Zachariah saddled 2 horses, a gentle mare for Eleanor and a sturdy gelding for himself. Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness as she approached the mare, but the animal seemed calm and patient. With Zachariah's help, she mounted and settled into the saddle. Her body remembered the motions even if her muscles were not quite ready for them. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, following a well-worn path across the rangeland. Zachariah pointed out landmarks and boundaries, explaining how he had gradually expanded his holdings as he could afford to buy or claim more land. The ranch now covered nearly 2,000 acres, an expanse that seemed impossible to Eleanor. "How can one man manage all of this?" she asked as they paused at the top of a rise to look out over the grazing cattle. "It is not easy," Zachariah admitted. "During spring roundup and fall gathering, I hire a few hands to help, but most of the year it is just me. That is one reason why I need a partner. Running a ranch alone is possible, but it is not sustainable long term. If something happens to me, if I get hurt or sick, everything falls apart." Eleanor nodded slowly, understanding the practical reality of their arrangement even more clearly. Zachariah needed her not just for companionship, but for survival, and she needed him just as much. Neither of them could make it alone out here. They spent the morning riding the fence line, and Eleanor watched as Zachariah repaired a section where a post had rotted through. He worked with practiced efficiency, replacing the post and restringing the barbed wire with gloved hands. Eleanor found herself fascinated by his competence, the way he moved through the work without wasted motion. "Can you teach me?" she asked suddenly. Zachariah looked up from tightening a wire. "Teach you what?" "This. How to repair fences, how to care for cattle, all of it. I want to be useful, not just someone who cooks and cleans. I want to be a true partner." Something shifted in Zachariah's expression, a warmth that had not been there before. "I would be happy to teach you. Though I warn you, it is hard work and not always pleasant." "I did not expect it to be easy," Eleanor said, "but I want to learn." Over the following days, Zachariah kept his word. He taught Eleanor how to check cattle for signs of illness or injury, how to mend tack and repair fence, how to read the weather signs in the sky and the behavior of the animals. Eleanor absorbed everything eagerly, determined to prove herself capable. In the evenings, they continued their conversations, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their futures. Eleanor learned that Zachariah had grown up in Texas, the son of a farmer who had lost his land to debt. He had joined the army at 17, seeking stability and purpose, and had spent 6 years in uniform before mustering out and heading to the New Mexico territory to start fresh. "I did not want to repeat my father's mistakes," he explained one night as they sat outside watching the stars emerge. "He was a good man, but he did not understand the land or the markets. He borrowed too heavily and planted the wrong crops. I learned from watching him that you have to be smart about these things, not just hardworking." Eleanor told him about her own childhood. Daughter of a shopkeeper who had made a modest but comfortable living until the war had disrupted everything. Her father had volunteered despite being past the age of conscription, driven by a sense of duty that had ultimately cost him his life at Gettysburg. "My mother never really recovered from losing him," Eleanor said softly. "She kept the shop going for a few years, but her heart was not in it. When she caught influenza last fall, I think part of her was ready to go, to be with him again." "That must have been hard for you to lose both of them." Zachariah's voice was gentle. "It was, but it also freed me in a strange way. There was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. The shop was sold to pay debts, and I had no other family. Coming west felt like the only real choice I had." "I am glad you made that choice," Zachariah said, and Eleanor heard the sincerity in his voice. By the end of the week, Eleanor felt as though she had known Zachariah far longer than the actual 7 days. There was an ease between them now, a comfort that came from shared work and honest conversation. She had seen him frustrated when a cow got stuck in the creek bed, patient when teaching her how to properly saddle a horse, and bone-tired after a long day of labor. She had seen him in all the small, unglamorous moments that made up real life, and she liked what she saw. On the 7th evening, as they sat down to dinner, Zachariah cleared his throat. "Eleanor, this week has passed quickly. Tomorrow is Sunday, and Father Miguel will be in town. If you are still willing, we could speak with him about the wedding." Eleanor set down her fork and looked across the table at the man who would become her husband. He met her gaze steadily, neither pushing nor pulling back, simply waiting for her answer. "Yes," she said. "I am still willing. More than willing. I think we can build a good life together, Zachariah." Relief and happiness crossed his features. "I think so too." The next morning they made the trip back to Agua Caliente. Eleanor wore her best dress, a dark blue silk that had survived the journey relatively unscathed, and Zachariah had put on a clean shirt and vest. They both carried the nervous energy of people about to make a life-changing decision, even though that decision had already been made days ago. Father Miguel was an elderly priest with kind eyes and a thick Spanish accent. He met with them in the small adobe church that served the scattered Catholic community in the area. Through the narrow windows, Eleanor could see the dusty street of Agua Caliente and the distant mountains beyond. "So, you wish to be married," Father Miguel said, looking between them. "This is a serious sacrament, not to be entered into lightly. Tell me, Zachariah, why do you wish to marry this woman?" Zachariah did not hesitate. "Because I need a partner to build a life with, and because in the time I have spent with Eleanor, I have come to respect and admire her. I believe we can create something good together." Father Miguel turned to Eleanor. "And you, child, why do you wish to marry this man?" Eleanor took a breath. "Because Zachariah is honest and hardworking and kind, because he has shown me respect and patience. Because I believe he will be a good husband and, God willing, a good father. And because I am ready to put down roots and build something lasting, and I want to build it with him." The priest studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "These are good reasons, practical reasons. But marriage is more than practicality. It requires love, commitment, forgiveness. Can you promise these things to each other?" "Yes," they said in unison. Father Miguel smiled. "Then let us discuss the preparations. I can perform the ceremony next Saturday if that gives you enough time." "You will need witnesses. Do you have friends in town who can stand for you?" Zachariah nodded. "Thomas Reed and his wife Margaret. They own the general store. They have been good friends to me." "Good. Then come back Saturday at noon, and we will make this official in the eyes of God and the church." They left the church in a daze of planning and anticipation. Zachariah needed to stop at the general store anyway to pick up supplies, and when they entered, a middle-aged woman behind the counter immediately broke into a wide smile. "Zach, you did not tell me your intended had arrived." She hurried around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Eleanor. I am Margaret Reed. It is so wonderful to meet you." Eleanor found herself enveloped in a warm hug that smelled of cinnamon and soap. Margaret was round and cheerful, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun and laugh lines around her eyes. "It is wonderful to meet you too," Eleanor managed when Margaret finally released her. "Tom, get out here," Margaret called toward the back of the store. Zach brought his bride to town. A lanky man with thinning hair emerged from the storage room, a ledger in his hands. Thomas Reed had the look of a shopkeeper, neat and precise, but his smile was genuine as he shook Eleanor's hand. "Welcome to Agua Caliente, Miss Dawson. Zach has been talking about your arrival for weeks now." Eleanor glanced at Zachariah, who looked slightly embarrassed but pleased. "Has he?" "Oh, yes," Margaret jumped in. "He was so nervous about whether you would like the ranch, whether you would find him acceptable, all of it. I kept telling him that any woman willing to come all the way out here was clearly made of strong stuff and would be just fine." "Margaret speaks the truth, as always," Zachariah said dryly. "Which is why I am hoping you and Tom will stand as witnesses for our wedding this Saturday." Margaret's squeal of delight could probably be heard throughout the town. "Of course we will. Oh, this is wonderful. Eleanor, you must let me help you prepare. You have a proper dress. We should have a celebration after the ceremony. I will make a cake and invite some of the neighbors." The next hour passed in a flurry of planning as Margaret took charge of the wedding preparations with enthusiastic efficiency. Eleanor found herself warming to the older woman's genuine kindness and excitement. After so many weeks of uncertainty and loneliness, it felt good to have someone treating this as a joyful occasion. On the ride back to the ranch, Zachariah was quieter than usual. Eleanor watched him from the corner of her eye, trying to read his mood. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked finally. He looked startled. "No, not at all. I was just thinking about how quickly things can change. A week ago, you were still on a stagecoach somewhere. Now we are planning our wedding, and next week we will be married. It is a bit overwhelming when you think about it." "Yes, it is," Eleanor agreed. "But I think it is good overwhelming. Forward momentum rather than stagnation. That is a good way to think about it." Zachariah was quiet for another moment, then added, "Eleanor, I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to make you happy. I know this is not the life you were raised for, and it will not always be easy. But I promise you will always have my respect and my protection." "And you will have mine," Eleanor said firmly. "I am not fragile, Zachariah. I am here to be your partner, not your burden." He smiled at that. "I am beginning to understand that." The days leading up to the wedding passed quickly. Eleanor and Zachariah fell into a rhythm of work and companionship that felt natural despite its newness. Eleanor took over the cooking and household management, but she also continued to accompany Zachariah on his daily work around the ranch. She was getting more comfortable on horseback and learning to read the signs of the land and animals. One afternoon, they checked on the patch of earth where Eleanor had planted her lavender seeds. To her delight, tiny green sprouts were beginning to emerge from the soil. "Look." She knelt beside the patch, touching one of the delicate shoots with a gentle finger. "They are growing." Zachariah crouched beside her, studying the new growth. "They are stronger than they look, aren't they? Lavender is actually quite hardy once established. These little sprouts will grow deeper roots over the summer, and by next spring, they will be proper plants." Eleanor sat back on her heels, smiling. "My mother would be so happy to know that her lavender is growing here, so far from Philadelphia." "I think she would be happy knowing that you are building a new life," Zachariah said quietly. "That you are not just surviving but truly living." Eleanor looked at him, struck by the insight in his words. "Yes, I think you are right. She always wanted me to be happy, even if that meant leaving everything familiar behind." Saturday arrived bright and clear. Eleanor woke early and bathed carefully, using the last of the lavender soap she had brought from Philadelphia. She dressed in her mother's wedding dress, which she had carefully packed in her trunk. It was a simple gown of cream-colored silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, altered to fit Eleanor's taller frame. Looking at herself in the small mirror Zachariah had hung in the bedroom, Eleanor felt a pang of sadness that her mother could not be here to see this day, but also a sense of rightness. She was honoring her mother's memory by moving forward, by choosing life and hope. Zachariah wore his best suit, dark wool that he had clearly not worn in some time based on how carefully he moved in it. His hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved so that his face looked younger and slightly vulnerable. When Eleanor emerged from the bedroom, she saw his eyes widen. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. You look very handsome." They rode to town together in the wagon, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. The small church was more crowded than Eleanor had expected. Margaret had clearly spread the word, and curious townspeople filled several of the pews, all dressed in their Sunday best. Father Miguel stood at the altar in his vestments, his lined face serene and welcoming. Thomas and Margaret waited near the front, both beaming. As Eleanor walked down the short aisle on Zachariah's arm, She felt the weight of all these strangers' eyes on her, but rather than making her nervous, it filled her with a sense of community. These people had come to witness the beginning of her new life. The ceremony itself was traditional and solemn. Father Miguel spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about partnership and commitment, about the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Eleanor and Zachariah repeated their vows, their voices steady and clear. When Zachariah slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was real. She was truly married now, bound to this man and this place. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Father Miguel said with a satisfied smile. "Zachariah, you may kiss your bride." Zachariah's kiss was brief and chaste, respectful of their public audience, but Eleanor felt its significance. They were truly united now, for better or worse. The congregation erupted in applause, and Margaret immediately swept Eleanor into another crushing hug. "Welcome to the family, dear. Now come on, we have food and cake waiting at our place." The celebration at the Reeds' home was warm and welcoming. Neighbors Eleanor had not yet met introduced themselves and offered advice on everything from gardening in the desert soil to the best way to preserve meat for the winter. She met other ranch families, shopkeepers, a blacksmith, a schoolteacher, and various other people who made up the small community of Agua Caliente. One woman in particular caught Eleanor's attention. Rosa Martinez was about Eleanor's age, with dark eyes and a warm smile. Her husband Miguel worked as a ranch hand on one of the larger spreads nearby. "I am so glad to meet you," Rosa said, taking Eleanor's hands in hers. "There are not many young women out here. Most families have young children or are older. I have been hoping for a friend closer to my own age." "I would like that very much," Eleanor said sincerely. "I must admit, I know very little about life out here. I have much to learn." "We will teach each other," Rosa said with a laugh. "I grew up in Santa Fe, so the desert I understand, but ranching, that is still new to me too. Miguel and I have only been married 2 years. They talked for several minutes, and Eleanor felt hopeful about this budding friendship. Rosa was lively and funny, with a straightforward manner that Eleanor appreciated. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor found herself watching Zachariah from across the room. He stood with a group of men, talking about cattle prices and weather predictions, but his eyes kept finding her in the crowd. Each time their gazes met, he would give her a small smile, private and warm. Finally, as the sun began to set, Zachariah made their excuses and they prepared to leave. Margaret pressed a basket of leftovers into Eleanor's hands along with what remained of the wedding cake, and Rosa made Eleanor promise to visit soon. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them tired from the long day and the weight of emotion. Eleanor's mind was already racing ahead to what would happen when they arrived home, to the wedding night that awaited them. She and Zachariah had not discussed it explicitly, but the reality of their marriage was about to become undeniably concrete. When they reached the ranch, Zachariah helped Eleanor down from the wagon with careful hands. The sun had fully set now, and stars were beginning to emerge in the vast sky overhead. In the distance, cattle called to each other, a sound Eleanor was beginning to find comforting in its familiarity. "Eleanor," Zachariah said softly, still holding her hands. "I want you to know that there is no rush. We have the rest of our lives together. Whatever happens tonight or does not happen, I want you to feel safe and comfortable." Eleanor felt a rush of affection for this thoughtful man who had become her husband. "Thank you for saying that. I feel the same way. We should let things unfold naturally without pressure or expectations." He nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Then let us just be together as husband and wife and see where the evening takes us." They went inside, and Zachariah lit the lamps while Eleanor put away the basket of food. The small house felt different now, more truly like a home they shared rather than his space that she was borrowing. She moved through the rooms with a new sense of ownership and belonging. Later, as they sat together by the fire, Eleanor found herself leaning against Zachariah's shoulder. He stiffened for just a moment in surprise, then relaxed and put his arm around her. They sat like that in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds outside. "Are you happy?" Zachariah asked eventually. Eleanor considered the question seriously. Happy seemed like a big word for the complex mix of emotions she was feeling, anticipation and hope and lingering grief and nervous excitement all tangled together. But underneath it all, there was a fundamental sense of rightness. "Yes," she said finally. "I think I am, or at least I am on the path to happiness. Today felt like a beginning, the start of something real and lasting." "It did," Zachariah agreed. He turned slightly so he could look at her face. "Eleanor, I know we married for practical reasons, but I want you to know that I am committed to making this a real marriage in every sense. I want us to build not just a ranch but a life together. I want us to care for each other, to become true partners." "I want that too," Eleanor said softly. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw beneath her fingers. "I think we can have that if we are patient with each other and honest." Zachariah turned his head and kissed her palm, a gesture so tender that Eleanor felt her breath catch. Then he stood and offered her his hand. "Come, let us go to bed, wife." The words sent a shiver through Eleanor, but it was not fear. She placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the bedroom they would now share. The first weeks of marriage passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Eleanor learned the rhythms of Zachariah's work, the early mornings and long days, the constant cycle of tasks that kept a ranch running. She took over the cooking completely, learning to adapt her recipes to the ingredients available and the wood-burning stove's temperamental nature. Zachariah was an attentive husband, considerate and gentle, but also increasingly affectionate as they grew more comfortable with each other. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit together and talk about their days, sharing small victories and frustrations. The physical intimacy between them deepened naturally, and Eleanor was surprised by how quickly she came to crave his touch, the solid warmth of his body beside hers at night. One morning in late April, about 3 weeks after the wedding, Eleanor woke feeling slightly ill. She managed to make breakfast, but the smell of the frying bacon made her stomach turn. Zachariah noticed immediately, "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I am fine, just a bit unsettled, perhaps something I ate." Eleanor forced herself to finish preparing the meal, though she could not bring herself to eat much. The nausea continued over the next several days, worst in the mornings but sometimes lingering into the afternoon. Eleanor tried to hide it from Zachariah, not wanting to worry him, but he was too observant. "Eleanor, you need to see the doctor in town," he said finally, his voice firm with concern. "This has gone on too long to be nothing." "I truly do not think it is necessary," Eleanor protested, though secretly she was beginning to wonder herself. There was a possibility that had started forming in her mind, but it seemed too soon to even consider. "We are going to town tomorrow," Zachariah said in a tone that brooked no argument. "Dr. Harrison is a good man. He will figure out what is wrong." The next day, they made the trip to Agua Caliente. Dr. Harrison was indeed a kind man, with silver hair and a gentle manner. He listened to Eleanor's symptoms, asked several careful questions, and then examined her with professional efficiency while Zachariah waited nervously in the outer room. When the examination was complete, Dr. Harrison smiled. "Mrs. Lawson, congratulations. You are expecting a child." I would estimate you are about 6 weeks along, which means the baby should arrive sometime in December. Eleanor sat very still, letting the words sink in. A baby. She was going to have a baby. Joy and terror washed over her in equal measure. Are you certain? As certain as I can be at this early stage. But yes, all the signs are there. You are quite healthy, and I see no reason why you should not have a perfectly normal pregnancy and delivery. He patted her hand. I know it is a shock, but it is happy news. When Eleanor emerged from the examination room, Zachariah jumped to his feet. Well, what did he say? Eleanor looked at her husband, at his concerned face and worried eyes, and felt a wave of love so strong it almost knocked her breathless. Zachariah, I am with child. We are going to have a baby. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing. Then a grin broke across his face, transforming him into someone almost unrecognizable in his pure joy. He swept Eleanor into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite the doctor's startled protest about being careful. A baby, Zachariah said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her shoulders. Eleanor, we are going to have a baby. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. We are. They walked out of the doctor's office in a daze of happiness. Zachariah insisted on stopping at the general store to tell Margaret and Thomas, who immediately began planning what they would need to prepare. Margaret promised to help Eleanor sew baby clothes and prepare the house for the new arrival. On the ride home, Eleanor rested her hand on her still flat stomach, marveling at the life growing inside her. It happened so quickly. We have only been married 3 weeks. I know, Zachariah said, his voice full of wonder, but I am glad. I meant what I said about wanting a family. The sooner we start building it, the better. Eleanor thought about the lavender growing on the south side of the house, about how she and Zachariah had planted those seeds together just weeks ago. Everything was growing here, the lavender, their marriage, and now a new life. It felt right, like pieces falling into place according to some greater pattern. She could not quite see but could sense over the following months. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed normally, despite some continued morning sickness. Her body changed, her belly growing round and full, and Zachariah treated her with even more gentleness and care. He insisted she not overwork herself, and took over many of the heavier household tasks despite his already full workload. The lavender continued to grow too, forming small but hardy plants that Zachariah faithfully watered each evening. By July, the plants were nearly a foot tall, their silvery green leaves filling in nicely. They had not yet bloomed, true to Eleanor's prediction, but they looked healthy and established. Rosa Martinez became a frequent visitor, often riding over to spend the afternoon with Eleanor. The two women worked on sewing projects together, preparing the small room off the main living area as a nursery. Rosa was full of advice and stories from her own family, as she had several younger siblings she had helped raise. "You will be a wonderful mother," Rosa said one hot afternoon as they sat together hemming small flannel gowns. "You have patience and kindness, which are the most important things." "I hope so," Eleanor said, resting one hand on her swollen belly. "Sometimes I feel so unprepared. What do I really know about caring for a baby? I was an only child. I never had younger siblings to practice on." "No one feels prepared," Rosa assured her. "But love teaches you what you need to know. You and Zach will figure it out together." In August, the heat became oppressive even by New Mexico standards. Zachariah worried constantly about Eleanor overdoing it, but she refused to spend all her time resting. She still helped where she could with the lighter ranch work, and she had taken over a small vegetable garden she had started near the house. One evening, as they sat outside trying to catch any hint of a breeze, Zachariah placed his hand on Eleanor's belly and was rewarded with a strong kick. "Did you feel that?" Eleanor laughed. "He or she is very active today, strong," Zachariah said with pride. "That is a strong baby. He will be able to help with the ranch work before we know it, or she will," Eleanor countered. "Do not assume our child will be a boy." "True," Zachariah admitted. "A daughter would be just as welcome, though I confess I have been imagining teaching a son to ride and work cattle." "Well, you could teach a daughter those things too," Eleanor pointed out. "I am learning them after all," Zachariah smiled. "You are absolutely right. Boy or girl, this child will grow up knowing how to work hard and appreciate the land." As fall arrived, the landscape around the ranch transformed. The brutal heat eased, and the occasional rain shower brought temporary green to the hills. Eleanor's due date drew closer, and Zachariah grew increasingly nervous. He made sure they had everything the doctor had recommended: clean sheets and towels, hot water ready at all times, and Margaret Reed on standby to assist with the birth. In early December, just as the first real cold snap arrived, Eleanor went into labor. Zachariah rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch Dr. Harrison and Margaret while Eleanor tried to remain calm and remember everything she had been told about childbirth. Rosa arrived shortly after Zachariah left, alerted by a ranch hand Zachariah had stopped to inform on his way to town. "You are not alone," Rosa said firmly, taking Eleanor's hand. "I am here and the doctor is coming. Everything will be fine." The labor was long and difficult, as first births often are. Eleanor had never experienced such pain, wave after wave of contractions that seemed to tear through her entire body. But Rosa stayed with her the entire time, offering water and cool cloths and constant encouragement. Dr. Harrison arrived with Margaret and Zachariah, and he immediately took charge with calm efficiency. He examined Eleanor and declared that everything was progressing normally, if slowly. Zachariah hovered anxiously until the doctor shooed him out of the room. "This is women's work, and you will only be in the way. Go find something useful to do and let us handle this." For the next several hours, Zachariah paced outside while Eleanor labored inside. Finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry pierced the air. Zachariah froze, his heart hammering, until Margaret emerged with a tired but genuine smile. "You have a son, Zach. A healthy baby boy, and Eleanor did wonderfully. She is tired but well." Zachariah rushed inside to find Eleanor propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes glowing with joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle, red-faced and squalling. "Zachariah, meet your son." Eleanor's voice was hoarse but full of love. Zachariah approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. He looked down at the tiny person in his wife's arms and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was his son, his child, a new life that he and Eleanor had created together. "He is perfect," Zachariah whispered, reaching out to gently touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers immediately closed around Zachariah's finger with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names over the past months, but had never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Zachariah said, "What about Samuel? It means heard by God. We prayed for a healthy child, and our prayers were answered." "Samuel," Eleanor repeated, testing the name. "Samuel Lawson. I like it. Samuel it is." Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm as they adjusted to having a newborn in the house. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and growing rapidly, though he kept them up many nights with his hungry cries. Eleanor recovered well from the birth, and Zachariah marveled daily at her strength and patience with their son. Winter arrived in full force, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The ranch work slowed, and Zachariah spent more time inside with Eleanor and Samuel, grateful for the enforced family time. He would sit by the fire holding his son, talking to him about the ranch and the life he would grow up knowing, while Eleanor worked on mending or cooking and smiled at them both. Christmas came, and Margaret and Thomas invited them to town for a celebration with other families. Eleanor wrapped Samuel warmly, and they made the cold journey, arriving to find the Reeds' home filled with light and laughter, and the smell of roasting meat. Rosa and Miguel were there with Rosa's extended family, and Eleanor was touched by how many people had brought small gifts for Samuel, knitted blankets and tiny clothes and carved wooden toys. It felt good to be part of this community, to have people who cared about their small family's welfare. On the ride home that evening, with Samuel sleeping peacefully in Eleanor's arms, Zachariah said quietly, "This is the happiest I have ever been. I did not know life could be like this." Eleanor looked at her husband, at his profile illuminated by the moonlight, and felt a surge of deep affection. "I feel the same way. When I left Philadelphia, I was running from grief and loss. I never imagined I would find this much joy waiting for me here. We built this together," Zachariah said, "you and me from nothing. We planted those lavender seeds and said we would grow together, and look at us now." Eleanor remembered that day, which seemed both impossibly long ago and like yesterday. So much had changed since then, but the core of what they had started remained the same, a commitment to building something lasting, to growing together despite the harsh conditions and uncertainty. The winter passed slowly, and when spring arrived, it brought renewed energy and purpose. The ranch work picked up again, and Eleanor juggled caring for Samuel with helping Zachariah prepare for the busy season ahead. Samuel was a happy baby, content to lie on a blanket in the shade while his parents worked nearby. One warm April afternoon, nearly a year after they had first planted the lavender, Eleanor stood looking at the south side of the house and gasped in delight. The lavender plants, which had grown sturdy and full over the past months, were suddenly covered in purple blooms. The flowers were small but abundant, and the scent was heavenly, exactly like Eleanor remembered from her mother's garden. "Zachariah, come look," she called. He emerged from the barn and walked over, Samuel balanced on his hip. When he saw the lavender in full bloom, he smiled widely. "It is beautiful, Eleanor, just like you said it would be." Eleanor reached out and gently touched one of the purple flower spikes, releasing even more of the sweet fragrance. "My mother would be so happy to see this. Her lavender, thriving here in New Mexico, so far from where it started." "Everything thrives here, given the right conditions and care," Zachariah said, coming to stand beside her. He shifted Samuel to his other arm and pulled Eleanor close with his free hand. "We are proof of that." They stood together, the three of them, looking at the lavender that represented so much more than just pretty flowers. It represented continuity and hope, the way that good things could take root in new soil and flourish beyond all expectation. As the months and years passed, the Lawson family continued to grow and thrive. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler, fearless and curious about everything around him. In the fall of 1878, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. 2 years later, another son arrived, William, completing their family. The ranch prospered too. Zachariah expanded the herd carefully, never overextending their resources, and slowly but steadily built up their holdings. Eleanor proved to be an astute partner, managing the household finances and suggesting improvements that paid off. They added on to the house, creating more bedrooms for the children and a larger main room for their growing family. The lavender patch expanded as well. Each year, Eleanor saved seeds and started new plants, until the entire south side of the house was lined with lavender bushes that bloomed gloriously each spring. She dried the flowers and made sachets for the linens, lavender soap, and even lavender honey from the bees Zachariah helped her establish. The lavender became known throughout the region, and people would occasionally stop by to purchase sachets or cuttings for their own gardens. Rosa and Miguel remained close friends, their children growing up together with the Lawson children. Margaret and Thomas became like grandparents to Samuel, Grace, and William, doting on them and teaching them their letters and numbers during winter visits to town. One evening in the summer of 1882, as Eleanor and Zachariah sat on the porch watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, Zachariah took his wife's hand. "You remember the day you arrived?" he asked. "How uncertain everything was." "I remember being terrified," Eleanor admitted. "I had no idea what I was getting into or if I was making a terrible mistake. And now—" Eleanor looked at the house they had built together, at the lavender blooming beside it, at their 3 beautiful children playing in the yard, at the strong, kind man beside her who had become her partner in every sense of the word. "Now I know I made exactly the right choice. This is home, Zachariah, not just the place, but the life we have created here together. We'll grow together here," Zachariah said, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago when they first planted the lavender seeds. "That is what I said, and it came true." "It did," Eleanor agreed. "Better than I ever could have imagined." Samuel came running up to the porch, his face flushed with excitement. "Papa, can you tell us a story, please?" Grace and William immediately echoed their older brother's request, and Zachariah laughed. "What story would you like to hear?" "Tell us about when Mama first came here," Samuel said. "Tell us about the lavender." Zachariah glanced at Eleanor, who smiled and nodded. It was a story they told often. How Eleanor had traveled from Philadelphia with nothing but hope and a pouch of lavender seeds. How they had married within weeks of meeting. How they had planted those seeds together and watched them grow just as their love and family had grown. As Zachariah began the familiar tale, Eleanor leaned back and closed her eyes, breathing in the sweet scent of lavender that drifted on the evening breeze. The children listened raptly, never tiring of hearing about their parents' beginnings, about the brave choice their mother had made and the faith their father had shown. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, dry summers when the creek ran low, and years when prices dropped and money was tight. But there were also births and celebrations, successful harvests and seasons when everything went right. Through it all, Eleanor and Zachariah faced each challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. Samuel grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, eager to learn everything about cattle and horses and the land. Grace was bright and inquisitive, constantly asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. William was the gentle one, more interested in plants and growing things than in livestock, and Eleanor was delighted to teach him everything she knew about gardening and herbs. By 1890, Samuel was 22 years old and running much of the daily ranch operation alongside his father. Grace, at 19, had become the schoolteacher for the small school that had been built in Agua Caliente, riding into town 3 days a week to teach the children of the growing settlement. William, at 17, was helping his mother expand her lavender and herb business, which had grown beyond anything they had initially imagined. Eleanor was now 42 years old, her dark hair showing threads of gray, but Zachariah thought she had never been more beautiful. The years had refined her features, giving her face character and depth. She moved through her days with confidence and grace, a respected member of the community and a devoted wife and mother. Zachariah himself was 51 now, his hair more silver than dark, his face deeply lined by sun and weather. But he was still strong and capable, and he woke each morning grateful for the life he had built. One spring evening, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Eleanor said, "I have been thinking about the future." "Oh," Zachariah turned to look at her. "Samuel is interested in the Martinez girl, Lucia, Rose's niece. I think he is going to ask to court her soon." "I suspected as much," Zachariah said with a slight smile. "He has been finding excuses to ride over to Rose's place every other day. It is not subtle." Eleanor laughed. "No, it is not. But Lucia is a lovely girl, hardworking and kind. She would be a good match for him." "She would," Zachariah agreed. "It is strange to think of our son courting and eventually marrying. Where did the time go? I ask myself that every day." Eleanor rested her head on Zachariah's shoulder. "But I am happy to see him finding his own path, building his own future. That is what we want for all our children." "What about you?" Zachariah asked. "Are you happy, Eleanor?" Truly, Eleanor thought about the question seriously. There were things she missed about the East, the culture and libraries, the variety of goods available, the presence of her parents' graves. But those losses were old now, their edges worn smooth by time and new joys. "I am happy," she said finally. "This life is everything I hoped for and more. We have built something real and lasting, something that will continue beyond us through our children and their children. The lavender still blooms every spring, and every time I see it, I remember that first day when we planted those seeds together. Everything grew, just like you said it would." Zachariah kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you for years now, though I do not think I knew what love really meant in those early days when we married." "I love you too," Eleanor said softly, "more than I can properly express. You gave me a home when I had lost everything, and then you gave me a family and a purpose. You made me happy." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge overhead. Inside the house, they could hear William humming as he worked on drying lavender flowers, and in the distance, Samuel's voice called out to the cattle. Everything was as it should be, true to Eleanor's prediction. Samuel did begin courting Lucia Martinez, and by the fall of 1890 they were engaged. The wedding took place the following spring in the same small church where Eleanor and Zachariah had married 15 years earlier. Father Miguel, now quite elderly but still serving his congregation faithfully, performed the ceremony with trembling hands but a clear voice. Eleanor cried during the ceremony, watching her firstborn son pledge his life to the young woman who stood beside him. Zachariah held her hand throughout, his own eyes suspiciously bright. After the ceremony, there was a grand celebration that combined traditions from both the Lawson and Martinez families, food and music and dancing that lasted late into the night. Samuel and Lucia built a small house on the northern edge of the ranch, and Samuel took over more and more of the daily operations as Zachariah gradually stepped back. In 1892, Lucia gave birth to a daughter, making Eleanor and Zachariah grandparents for the first time. The baby was named Margaret Eleanor, after both grandmothers, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with joy the first time she held the tiny bundle. Grace continued teaching but showed no particular interest in marrying, much to the frustration of several young men in the area. She was content with her books and her students, she declared, and if the right person came along someday, that would be fine, but she was not going to go looking. William, meanwhile, had discovered a talent for breeding and developing new plant varieties. He had successfully crossed different types of lavender to create a variety that bloomed twice each year, and he was working on developing herbs that were more resistant to the harsh desert conditions. His work attracted the attention of agricultural experts as far away as Santa Fe, and at 24 years old, he was making a name for himself. The ranch itself continued to prosper. The cattle herd was now substantial, and Zachariah's horses had gained a reputation for being well-trained and sturdy. The family was not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, which was more than many could say. In the spring of 1895, Margaret Reed passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. The entire community mourned her loss, as she had been a beloved figure who had helped countless families over the years. Eleanor felt the loss keenly, as Margaret had been one of her first friends in New Mexico and had supported her through many challenges. At the funeral, Eleanor stood beside the grave holding Zachariah's hand while their children stood nearby with their own families. Samuel had 2 children now, little Margaret and a son named Thomas after his honorary grandfather. Life continued its cycle of beginnings and endings, growth and loss, and Eleanor understood more deeply than ever the importance of cherishing each moment. That summer, Grace surprised everyone by announcing that she was engaged. The young man was a lawyer from Santa Fe named David Foster, who had come to Agua Caliente on business and had been immediately captivated by the intelligent schoolteacher. Grace admitted that she had not been looking for love, but it had found her anyway. The wedding was held in the fall, another joyous occasion that brought the community together. Grace and David settled in Santa Fe, where Grace would help establish a larger school, but they promised to visit the ranch frequently. Eleanor was sad to see her daughter move away, but happy that Grace had found a partner who valued her intelligence and independence. By 1897, Eleanor and Zachariah had been married for 21 years. They were now in their 40s and 50s respectively, entering the later years of their lives together. The ranch was in good hands with Samuel and William both contributing their different talents, and Grace was happy in Santa Fe. They had 4 grandchildren now, with another on the way, and the family continued to grow and flourish. One quiet evening in late spring, Eleanor and Zachariah took a walk around the property as they often did. The lavender was in full bloom, more abundant than ever, filling the air with its sweet scent. They walked hand in hand through the fields where cattle grazed, past the creek where water burbled over stones, around the various outbuildings and corrals that made up the working ranch. "You remember what you said the day we planted the first lavender seeds?" Eleanor asked. "I said we would grow together here," Zachariah replied, "and we have. We certainly have." "We have grown old together," Eleanor said with a slight laugh. "Look at us, gray hair and wrinkles. When did that happen?" Slowly and then all at once, Zachariah said, "but I regret none of it." "These have been the best years of my life, Eleanor, every single one of them." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Mine too. Even the hard years, even the losses, they were all part of this life we built together. I would not change anything." They stood looking out over the land as the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the sky in colors that still took Eleanor's breath away, even after more than 2 decades in New Mexico. The house stood solid and welcoming behind them, smoke curling from the chimney where William was preparing dinner. In the distance, they could see Samuel and Lucia's house, lights beginning to glow in the windows as evening fell. "This is what we made," Zachariah said quietly. "Not just a ranch or a business, but a legacy. Our children and grandchildren will continue here, building on what we started. The lavender will keep blooming long after we are gone, and people will remember the story of how it came here." "I like that thought," Eleanor said. "That some part of us will continue, that the seeds we planted, literally and figuratively, will keep growing." They walked back to the house together, moving a bit more slowly than they once had, but still strong and capable. Inside, William had prepared a simple but delicious meal, and they ate together while he told them about his latest plant breeding experiments. It was a perfectly ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way except that it represented everything Eleanor had hoped for when she first stepped off that stagecoach in Agua Caliente so many years ago. The years continued to pass with increasing speed. In 1900, the new century arrived with great fanfare and celebration. The world was changing rapidly, with new technologies and ideas transforming society. But on the Lawson Ranch, life continued much as it always had, following the ancient rhythms of the seasons and the land. Thomas Reed passed away in 1901, and the general store was taken over by one of his nephews. The loss of both Margaret and Thomas left a hole in the community, but it also served as a reminder of the importance of cherishing the people still present. Grace and David had 3 children by now, and they made regular trips back to the ranch so the children could know their grandparents and cousins. Samuel and Lucia had 4 children, all thriving, and William had married a quiet young woman named Sarah who shared his passion for plants. They had 2 children and were expanding the herb and lavender business considerably. Eleanor was now in her mid-50s, and while she remained active and engaged, she had begun to slow down slightly. She spent more time in her garden and less time on the harder physical work of the ranch. Zachariah, approaching 70, had turned over most of the ranch operations to Samuel but still supervised and advised. His hair was now completely white, and he moved more carefully than he once had, but his mind remained sharp and his spirit strong. In the spring of 1905, on a beautiful April day much like the one when Eleanor first arrived, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered at the ranch for a grand celebration. Their children, now all grown with families of their own, had organized everything in secret, and Eleanor and Zachariah arrived at the house to find it transformed with decorations and filled with friends and family. "You have been married 30 years, Samuel said in a speech during dinner, raising his glass. "And in that time, you built not just a ranch but a family and a legacy. You showed all of us what true partnership looks like, what commitment and hard work and love can create. To Mama and Papa, thank you for everything you have given us." The gathered crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. Looking around at all these people, her children and grandchildren and friends, she was overwhelmed by gratitude for the life she had been given. Later that evening, when most of the guests had departed and the children were putting away the food and cleaning up, Eleanor and Zachariah slipped away to walk down to the creek in the moonlight. The lavender bushes, now decades old and sprawling, filled the air with their scent. 30 years, Eleanor said wonderingly. "When I stepped off that stagecoach, I could not have imagined any of this." "Neither could I," Zachariah admitted. "I thought I was just looking for a partner to help run the ranch. I had no idea I would find true love and build such a beautiful life." Eleanor turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you, Zachariah Lawson. I have loved you for so long now that I can barely remember what it felt like not to love you." "I love you too, Eleanor. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." He pulled her close and kissed her, a long, tender kiss that held 3 decades of love and partnership and shared experiences. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Eleanor and Zachariah spent their days puttering around the house and garden, visiting with grandchildren, and watching the ranch continue to thrive under Samuel and William's joint management. They took long walks together, reminiscing about the past and marveling at the present. The lavender continued to bloom each spring without fail, a living reminder of where their journey together had begun. Eleanor tended the plants carefully, and William took cuttings to sell and share, spreading the original Philadelphia lavender throughout the territory and beyond. In 1910, New Mexico was admitted to the Union as the 47th state, a momentous occasion that Eleanor and Zachariah witnessed with pride. They had been part of building this place when it was still wild territory, and now it was officially recognized as a full member of the nation. The changes they had seen over their decades in New Mexico were profound, from scattered settlements to established towns, from dangerous frontier to settled communities. Eleanor celebrated her 65th birthday that year, and Zachariah turned 79. They were slowing down considerably now, spending most of their time in and around the house rather than actively working the ranch. But they remained engaged and interested in life, doting on their ever-growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On a warm spring evening in 1912, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The lavender was in spectacular bloom, more beautiful than ever, and the scent wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. Inside, they could hear the sounds of family as several grandchildren were staying at the ranch for the week. "I have been thinking about the future," Eleanor said quietly. Zachariah turned to look at her. "What about it? I am 67 years old and you are 81. We have lived full, wonderful lives together. But someday one of us will leave before the other. I want to make sure we have said everything that needs to be said." Zachariah was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "You are right. We should not leave things unsaid." He took her hand, holding it gently. "Eleanor, you made my life worth living. Before you came, I had a ranch and work, but I did not have a real life. You gave me that. You gave me children and grandchildren, love and partnership, joy and meaning. Whatever happens next, whether I go first or you do, I want you to know that I am grateful for every single day we had together." Eleanor wiped tears from her eyes. "I feel the same way. You saved me, Zachariah. When I came here, I was lost and grieving and frightened. You gave me a home and a purpose, and a love I never expected to find. You made me happy every single day, even the hard days. I could not have asked for a better husband or a better life." They sat together in the gathering dusk, holding hands and watching the lavender sway gently in the evening breeze. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but they had lived well and loved deeply. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else together. Zachariah lived for 3 more years, passing away peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1915 at the age of 84. Eleanor was heartbroken but also grateful that he had not suffered, that he had simply slipped away while sleeping beside her in the bed they had shared for nearly 40 years. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the state of New Mexico. Zachariah Lawson had been respected and loved, a man who kept his word and treated everyone fairly. His legacy lived on not just in the prosperous ranch, but in his children and grandchildren, and in the countless people he had helped over the years. Eleanor continued on, tending her lavender and spending time with her family. She missed Zachariah terribly, but she was comforted by the life they had built together and by the fact that he had lived long and well. She kept busy with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the early days of the ranch. She lived for 7 more years, remaining active and engaged until the very end. In the spring of 1922, at the age of 77, Eleanor Dawson Lawson passed away surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were about the lavender, about making sure someone continued to tend it and remember the story of where it came from. They buried her beside Zachariah on a hillside overlooking the ranch, a spot with a view of the house and the creek and the fields where cattle still grazed. The lavender that had started from seeds carried from Philadelphia now covered much of the hillside around their graves, blooming purple and fragrant each spring. The ranch continued under Samuel's management, passed down through generations of Lawsons who knew the story of their great-great-grandparents. The lavender became a landmark. People would give directions based on the Lawson place with all the lavender, and cuttings from the original plants spread throughout New Mexico and beyond. The story of Eleanor and Zachariah became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. How a mail-order bride had carried lavender seeds from Philadelphia, how a lonely rancher had planted them with her and said, "We'll grow together here," and how that simple act of faith had blossomed into a love story that spanned 4 decades and changed countless lives. The lavender bloomed every spring without fail, a living testament to the power of hope, faith, and love. And though Eleanor and Zachariah were long gone, their legacy remained, growing and flourishing just as they had promised it would, rooted deep in the New Mexico soil they had made their home.